In a forgotten village, a girl was forced into a marriage she never asked for. She believed she was marrying a man as poor and powerless as herself. But behind his humble eyes lay a truth so powerful it would change everything she knew about love, loyalty, and destiny. Stay with us, because what she discovers will leave you speechless. In a dusty village where life moved slower than the weary winds that carried the scent of tilled earth and wild flowers, Amara sat rigidly on the edge of a rough-hewn bed, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The wedding drums thumped dully outside against the cracked mud walls of her family's small home. Once she had dreamed of this day, of love and laughter and promises under golden skies. But those dreams belonged to a richer life she would never know. Here, in this forgotten corner of the world, marriages were forged not from love, but from necessity. And Amara's future had been traded like a sack of grain to save her family from ruin. Her father, once a man of pride and strength, had bowed under years of failing crops and mounting debt. In his desperation, he had accepted a marriage proposal from the only family poorer than their own. Elias was a shadow in the village, a figure more rumor than man, carrying wood and fading into the background. She had seen him only in glimpses, silent, stooped, anonymous. There was nothing in him that spoke of rescue, no glimmer of hope for a life beyond survival. When her mother pinned the worn lace veil into her hair, whispering shaky reassurances, Amara remained silent. Safety was not the same as love, and she had long ago stopped hoping for love. The ceremony was brief and joyless, held beneath the gnarled branches of the ancient village tree. Elias waited in a threadbare white shirt, his boots coated in dust, his eyes cast downward. When Amara joined him, she saw the stiffness in his posture, the tremble in his hands. They exchanged vows without looking at each other, rings sliding onto fingers with mechanical precision. The small crowd of villagers clapped dutifully, their faces worn by pity rather than celebration. Together, husband and wife walked back through the village, a silent procession marked only by the heavy, unspoken weight of resignation hanging between them. The cottage Elias had prepared was small, just a single room with a stone hearth and a table sagging under its own age. Yet it was clean, and someone, perhaps Elias himself, had placed a jar of fresh wildflowers on the table. It was a tiny gesture of beauty in a life that seemed devoid of it. Amara barely noticed. She entered the home without a word, moving like a sleepwalker. Elias lit a fire in the hearth, his movements careful, his back always turned toward her. Amara sat on the bed, feeling the thin mattress give under her weight, her hands limp in her lap. The walls of the cottage seemed to close around her, sealing away every dream she had ever dared to have. Outside, the first stars pricked the evening sky. Inside, Elias kept his distance, stealing cautious glances at his new wife. There was an intensity to him that Amara did not yet understand, a quietness that was not born from shyness, but from the heavy burden of secrets he carried. Beneath his simple clothes and humble demeanor, Elias was hiding a truth so profound it could shatter the fragile world Amara clung to. But for now, he merely fed the fire, letting the warmth creep into the cold corners of their shared space. And so the night deepened, heavy with all the things left unsaid, as two souls bound by circumstance began a journey neither of them could yet foresee. The days that followed their quiet wedding blurred into a monotonous rhythm. Amara woke each morning to the scent of smoke from the hearth and the creak of Elias moving about the small cottage. He always rose before her, quietly tending to chores, chopping wood, fetching water. Their conversations were sparse, a few practical words about food or repairs, but never anything more. Amara tried not to resent him. After all, he was no more to blame for this forced marriage than she was. Yet the silence between them grew heavier with each passing day, filling the tiny home with a palpable tension neither dared to name. Amara found herself observing Elias when he wasn't looking. There was something about him that didn't quite fit the picture of a poor woodsman. His hands, though calloused, moved with a precision that suggested a life once far removed from chopping wood. His speech, when it came, was oddly formal, as if he had been taught manners that no longer served a purpose here. And though his clothes were patched and worn, they were always meticulously clean, as if he clung to a standard no one in the village would have expected him to maintain. These small details pricked at her curiosity, though she told herself it was foolish to hope for anything more than what she had been given. One evening, as the sun dipped below the ragged hills, Amara ventured outside to gather herbs. She returned to find Elias sitting at the battered table, hunched over a sheet of paper. The sight startled her. No one in their village wasted precious money on paper unless it was for matters of great importance. He quickly folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket as she entered, his movements stiff with the guilt of being caught. Amara said nothing, merely placed the herbs on the counter and busied herself with preparing supper. But questions gnawed at her throughout the meal. Who was he writing to? And why did he look so haunted afterward, staring into the fire long after the last embers had died? Over the next few days, Amara noticed other oddities. Elias often disappeared at dawn and returned late, offering no explanations for where he had been. Sometimes she would find small traces of mud on the floor, not the thick village mud, but the finer silt from the riverbanks far beyond their fields. Once she caught a glimpse of something glinting in the lining of his old satchel, a flash of gold embroidery, far too fine for a man of his supposed means. She wanted to ask him, to demand answers, but each time she opened her mouth, the weight of their fragile peace pressed it closed again. If she disturbed whatever precarious balance they had, she feared she might lose even this small semblance of stability. At night, as she lay stiffly on her side of the bed, Amara listened to Elias breathe in the dark, steady and slow. She wondered who he was before this village swallowed him. She wondered what secrets he guarded so fiercely that he would rather live as a ghost than reveal them. And more than anything, she wondered if those secrets had anything to do with her. With the girl he had been forced to marry, the girl he barely touched, barely spoke to, but whose presence seemed to weigh on him like a burden and a blessing all at once. Unbeknownst to her, the answers she sought were closer than she dared imagine. And the truth, when it came, would unravel the careful life they had built stitch by fragile stitch. The first real crack in the wall of silence between them came on a night thick with mist and the faint scent of rain. Amara woke from a restless sleep, disturbed by a soft murmur of voices drifting through the thin walls of the cottage. At first she thought it was a dream, the way the world sometimes echoes with imagined sounds when one hovers between sleep and waking. But then she heard it again, a low, urgent whisper, and the unmistakable sound of Elias's voice. Sliding quietly from the bed, Amara crept toward the tiny window that overlooked the woods behind their home. In the gloom she made out the faint silhouette of Elias standing a short distance from the cottage, speaking to a figure cloaked in shadow. She strained to hear, pressing her palm against the cold glass, her heart hammering in her chest. Words like "prepare" and "arrival" floated to her, sharp and ominous in the stillness. She caught only fragments, but enough to know that this was no casual conversation. The figure handed Elias a small satchel before disappearing into the mist. Elias lingered a moment longer, his head bowed, his posture tense, before slipping back into the house. Amara dove back into bed, feigning sleep as he crept across the room and slid the satchel into the loose floorboard beneath the hearth. Her mind raced. Who was the stranger? What were they preparing for? Fear gnawed at her, but so did something more potent, curiosity. In the days that followed, Elias became more restless. He would startle at sudden sounds, glance frequently toward the road leading out of the village. and often sit by the fire long after Amara had retired, his face illuminated by the flickering flames, lost in thought. Amara noticed that he had begun to keep the satchel close to him, never letting it out of his sight. Her unease grew with every passing hour, but still she said nothing, unsure whether to confront him or to wait and hope the truth would reveal itself in time. One evening, after Elias had gone to fetch water, Amara gave in to the temptation that had been eating at her. She knelt by the hearth and pried up the loose floorboard. Hidden beneath was the satchel, just as she had seen. Her hands trembling, she opened it. Inside, neatly folded, was a velvet pouch heavy with gold coins, more wealth than anyone in their village could hope to see in a lifetime. Beneath the pouch was a letter, its seal bearing a crest she did not recognize, but that looked regal, important. She traced the embossed symbol with her fingers, a chill running down her spine. Elias was not who he claimed to be, and whatever secret he carried, it was about to shatter everything she thought she knew. Amara stared at the letter, her breath quickening as questions crowded her mind. She knew she shouldn't open it. Whatever secrets Elias carried were his burden. But the memory of his whispered conversation with the stranger, the gold hidden beneath their floor, and the strange, restless sadness that clung to him like a second skin, gnawed at her better judgment. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. The parchment inside was thick and expensive, the script bold and formal. She read it once, then twice, the words swimming before her eyes. The letter spoke of an inheritance. It spoke of lands and titles, of responsibilities that stretched far beyond the simple boundaries of their village. And it spoke of Elias, not as a woodsman, not as a pauper, but as the rightful heir to a fortune hidden away until the time was right. A fortune tied to a name she had never heard, but that sounded grand and ancient. Amara's hands shook as she folded the letter closed. Everything she knew about her husband, the life they lived, the sacrifices they endured, was a lie. The cottage door creaked open, and Amara barely had time to shove the letter back into the satchel and replace the floorboard before Elias entered, his shoulders hunched against the cold. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable, before setting down a bundle of firewood. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Amara could feel the knowledge she now carried burning inside her, a secret as dangerous as any weapon. She busied herself at the hearth, her hands clumsy, her heart pounding. Every movement Elias made, every glance, now seemed layered with hidden meaning. Who was he, truly, and why had he buried himself in this forgotten place? That night Amara could not sleep. She lay stiffly beside Elias, staring at the rough beams of the ceiling, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of his breath beside her. Her mind churned with possibilities. Had he fled from something? Was he hiding from enemies, or was it guilt that weighed him down, guilt for a life he had abandoned, or a truth he could not bring himself to tell her? As the hours dragged by, a plan began to take shape in her mind. She would confront him, not with anger, not yet, but with questions he could not avoid. She deserved to know the truth. She needed to understand who she had been bound to in marriage. Before the dawn light could seep into the cottage, Amara rose from the bed. She dressed quickly, wrapping a shawl tightly around her shoulders. Elias stirred but did not wake. She moved silently to the door and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The village lay still and silent around her, a world asleep. With cautious steps, she made her way toward the woods where she had seen Elias meet the cloaked figure. If answers existed, they would not come from waiting. She would find them herself, even if it meant following the dangerous path that Elias had tried so desperately to keep hidden. The woods loomed dark and damp, heavy with the lingering mist of early morning. Amara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, every step forward fueled by the gnawing need for answers. Her heart pounded with fear and determination in equal measure. She didn't know what she expected to find. Perhaps Elias speaking with another stranger, perhaps more hidden truths. What she didn't expect was to find him alone, sitting on a fallen log, the letter she had returned to the satchel now open in his hands. His head bowed in defeat. She froze, half given by the trees, uncertain whether to approach. But Elias spoke without looking up, his voice low and raw, carrying easily in the stillness. "You read it, didn't you?" Emira's breath caught in her throat. Caught between guilt and anger, she stepped forward, crunching dried leaves underfoot. "I had to," she said, her voice trembling. "You left me no choice." Elias finally looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw not rage or betrayal, but something far worse. Resignation. He patted the log beside him, an invitation. Amara hesitated, then sat down, leaving a careful distance between them. For a long moment they said nothing, the silence filled only with the distant call of morning birds. Finally Elias spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was never meant to stay here. My family, they had plans for me, marriages, alliances, titles. I was their pawn." He let out a bitter laugh, but I refused. I left it all behind. I thought I could build a life away from their reach. Something real, something honest. Amara clenched her hands in her lap, the enormity of his words crashing over her. "Why hide it from me?" she asked, her voice breaking. Elias's gaze was steady. "Because I didn't want you to feel trapped, like I did. I wanted at least one thing in my life to be chosen freely, not arranged by wealth or power. I wanted you to choose me for who I am, not for what I have." Amara turned away, staring into the fog-shrouded wood. She wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all. But deep down she understood the fear that drove him. She understood it all too well. A heavy silence fell between them, thick with unspoken hopes and regrets. Elias reached into his satchel and pulled out a small, intricately carved box. He opened it slowly, revealing a delicate necklace, golden and simple, with a small locket shaped like a wildflower. "This was my mother's," he said quietly. "She wanted me to give it to the woman I chose to love, not the one chosen for me." He held it out, his hand shaking. "It's yours if you want it." Amara stared at the locket, her vision blurring with unshed tears. The weight of choice, something she had been denied her entire life, now rested heavy in her hands. She didn't take the necklace, not yet. But for the first time she saw Elias not as a stranger, not as a mystery, but as a man fighting for the right to live on his own terms. And maybe, just maybe, she could fight for herself too. The days that followed were a strange dance of unspoken questions and fragile understanding. Amara wore the necklace tucked under her dress, its weight a silent reminder of the choice Elias had placed in her hands. Slowly he began to open up, sharing pieces of the life he had abandoned. He spoke of marble halls and endless banquets, of lessons in diplomacy and business, before he could even write his own name. It was a world Amara could hardly imagine, a world where every smile hid a transaction, and every friendship was a wager. One morning Elias approached her with a folded map and a determined look in his eyes. "We can stay here if you wish," he said, "but if you want more, if you want to see what's out there, I can take you." Amara stared at the map, tracing the inked lines that led away from the village, through valleys and rivers and cities she had only ever heard of in stories. Her heart battled with itself. Fear of the unknown warred with a deep, aching yearning for something more. After a long silence, she looked up at Elias and simply nodded. They left at dawn, carrying little besides a change of clothes, some bread and cheese, and the satchel that had once held Elias's secrets. As they walked away from the village, Amara did not look back. The dirt roads soon gave way to wider, stone-paved ones, and the thatched roofs were replaced by inns bustling with travelers. Everywhere they went, Elia seemed to carry an invisible aura, an ease with the world that marked him as someone accustomed to more than he appeared. In the first city they entered, Amara's senses were overwhelmed. Stalls overflowed with spices that perfumed the air, fabrics shimmered in the sunlight, and carriages clattered noisily over cobblestone streets. Elias guided her gently, explaining the strange coins and customs without judgment or impatience. At an inn that night, he pulled from his satchel a ring, simple but unmistakably valuable, and traded it for a room far grander than anything Amara had ever dared dream of. She sat in wonder on a bed so soft it felt like a cloud, realizing just how much of his old life Elias had carried, hidden, in plain sight. In the nights that followed, Elias shared stories not just of wealth, but of mistakes, betrayals, and the loneliness that came with privilege. He had not run from fortune. He had run from the prison it built around his soul. And as Amara listened, she found herself weaving a new understanding of him, thread by thread. He was not a prince in disguise, nor a pauper pretending. He was both, and neither. A man searching for freedom and finding it, strangely, in the love of a girl who once thought she had nothing to offer the world but survival. In the city's golden haze, surrounded by opulence she had once thought belonged only to fairy tales, Amara felt both exhilarated and terrified. Elias moved through this world with an ease she admired but couldn't yet mirror. She struggled with her place at his side, not as the poor village girl she had been, but as something new, something unformed. And though Elias never wavered in his gentle reassurances, doubt gnawed at her like a hidden splinter. Did she truly belong in his world, or was she simply a chapter he would eventually outgrow? One evening, while Elias attended to business at the market square, Amara wandered through the bustling streets alone. She marveled at the silks, the perfumes, the jewelry that glinted in shop windows. It was then, in the reflection of a polished mirror, that she caught sight of a finely dressed woman whispering to a man nearby, their eyes darting toward her. Amara moved closer, heart pounding, and overheard enough to piece it together. Rumors were spreading that Elias, the lost heir, had returned, and that his companion, the village girl at his side, was little more than a scandal waiting to happen. Amara's world tilted on its axis. The whispered judgments echoed in her mind as she hurried back to their rented rooms. When Elias returned, his smile faltered at the sight of her pale face. "What's wrong?" he asked. She thrust the words between them like a blade. "They think I'm using you, that I'm a disgrace." Elias's face hardened, not in anger at her, but at the invisible enemies that circled them. "Let them think what they will," he said fiercely. "They don't know you. They don't know us." But Amara pulled away when he reached for her. "Maybe you don't either," she whispered, the fear and shame boiling over. The fight that followed was quiet but devastating. Elias spoke of his trust, his certainty, his love. Amara spoke of her fears, her sense of unworthiness, the terror that one day he would regret choosing her. In the end, it was not anger that broke them, but tears, hers and his. Elias knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. "I chose you when you had nothing," he said, voice shaking. "I chose you when all you could offer was your heart, and that is worth more than every title, every crown, every fortune this world could offer." Amara wept then, not from sorrow, but from the shattering relief of being seen, truly seen, and still loved. In the days that followed, they built their new life carefully, brick by emotional brick. They decided not to chase acceptance from a world that would never understand them. Instead, they would create their own world, a place where love was not weighed in gold and loyalty was not bartered for status. And though doubts would creep in like shadows from time to time, Amara wore her necklace proudly now, not hidden but displayed for all to see. It was a symbol not just of Elias's past, but of their shared future, fragile, hard-won, and infinitely precious. Spring arrived like a whispered promise, unfolding slowly across the countryside. Elias and Amara decided to leave the city behind, settling in a quiet village where no one cared about titles, fortunes, or the scandals of the distant elite. They found a modest cottage near a field that blazed with wildflowers each morning. Here there were no expectations but the simple rhythms of life, planting, harvesting, laughing, loving. For the first time, Amara felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders, replaced by something new and astonishing: joy. On a cool afternoon, Elias took Amara by the hand and led her into the meadow. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and fresh earth, and bees buzzed lazily among the blooms. Without a word, he knelt at her feet, gathering stems of daisies, violets, and tiny buttercups. Carefully, clumsily, he wove them into a circle and placed it atop her head. "You don't need a crown of gold to be my queen," he said, his voice low and earnest. Tears welled in Amara's eyes, not from sadness, but from a happiness so full it nearly burst inside her. They spent the day in the fields, chasing each other like children, falling into the grass, laughing until their ribs ached. The world they built was simple, but it was theirs, crafted not from ambition or legacy, but from shared glances, whispered dreams, and the steady heartbeat of trust. Amara learned to read and write, her fingers tracing letters with the same care she once gave to planting seeds. Elias built furniture by hand, finding satisfaction in the curve of a well-shaped chair rather than the trappings of his abandoned wealth. Their love was not perfect. There were days when shadows crept in, old fears, old doubts. But they faced them together, hand in hand. When news from the city reached them, rumors of Elias's family searching for him, of fortunes dwindling without their prodigal son, they did not run. They simply stayed where they were, rooted like the wild flowers that grew stronger with each season. It was not defiance, nor was it cowardice. It was choosing each other, again and again, in a world that had once tried to choose for them. Years later, when travelers passed through the village and spoke of grand houses and powerful names, Amara would smile and press a hand to the simple locket at her throat. She no longer needed silk gowns or marble halls. She had a crown woven from the earth's first gifts, a home built with two bare hands, and a love that had weathered every storm. And as she watched Elias across the fields, his hair kissed by the golden sun, she knew she had found the only treasure worth having: a life crafted from freedom, forgiveness, and a love fierce enough to change destiny itself.